All right, what's going on, guys? So, like I said in my last video, today we are going to talk about UI stuff for when you are making a new account. Now, when I say UI, I'm referring to the user interface. Right after you finish the tutorial, this is what you're going to be looking at. It could also be as soon as you start the game. If you say that you're a returning player, but you played a long time ago, it will run you through the old tutorial, then drop you off here. If you say you've never played before or you're very familiar with the game, it will also drop you off here. This is where all you guys should be once you finish this tutorial. The old tutorial is just follow what's in this box. I don't think I need to show you guys that. It's very, very straightforward. So yeah, first things first, I have my overlay in full screen. The main reason I do this is because you get a ton more visibility. So if you see here, if I set it to windowed, I lose a decent amount of visibility here. So personally, I just like to put it on full screen. It's not going to matter too much until you get to super end game, but when you are at the end game, that is going to matter a lot. If you are having any issues with performance, set this to minimum. It's going to make the game not look very cute, as you can see, but for whatever reason, RuneScape 3 uses a ton of resources and is not very well optimized, so just put it on minimum. You won't have any issues with performance. I play on Ultra because my computer can handle it, so that's what I'm going to play on this account. For audio, you can adjust this however you want. This is all to taste. Same thing with ribbon. This down here is the ribbon. These are a bunch of interfaces that you can look through, and it can show you just a bunch of menus that are pretty useful. We'll go over that another time when that's more relevant to a brand new player. You really don't need to be down there very often. Now, in gameplay, there is a couple of things here that we want to look at. First, for interfaces, I would not mess through any of this stuff. Click through chat box is something you could do if you want to. What it does is it lets you obviously click through the chat box. The only issue is that it doesn't let you click through any of your interfaces. So it could be a little bit jarring to only be able to click through here and not be able to click through here. So personally, I just leave this off. Besides that, I wouldn't mess with any of this. I believe skip boat cutscenes is off by default, so I would just turn this on. There really isn't a great reason to watch the cutscene. Maybe if you want to watch it once, you can, but personally, I just would leave this alone. For appearance, this lock interface icon, what this does is it makes it so you can't move and close out of any of these boxes, and it gets rid of the header, which I personally think looks a lot better. So once you have an interface that you're satisfied with, make sure you click lock. That way you don't actually delete something. Slim headers puts this tiny thing here instead of the full name. I think this looks dumb. This is all preference. Once you decide which one of these settings you want on, you can do that as you will. Same thing with transparency. That's all preference. Now, this legacy modes, it will let you either use the old interface or the old combat system and the old color scheme if you want to. Personally, I would say stay away from legacy combat. It doesn't make the game unplayable. The game is very functional in legacy, but it is pretty substantially worse as most new content is not designed with legacy in mind. It is possible with legacy. Rayo has a whole series where he's playing the entire game with legacy. I'll link that in the description since I brought it up. But yeah, there's really no reason to use legacy unless you're super hell-bent on not interacting with the new combat. For informational windows, I would leave all of this alone. I don't think there's any reason to touch any of this. By default, this Slayer counter is off. I just have it on top right. Once you start doing Slayer, this is going to keep track of your Slayer task and how many Slayer points you have. That's going to be relevant once we start talking about Slayer. So yeah, I would just leave all this alone. For warning screens, I would tick all of this on. The high risk area entry, what this means is whenever you go to an area where it's possible to lose your items, you have to type in your bank pin. This is just a security measure, not necessary if you don't plan on entering those items, but I like having this on because you never know what can happen. Same thing with high value drop warning. If you drop something that's expensive, you turn this on so that you have to type in your bank pin. This is just a safety thing. It's very easy to accidentally drop stuff in this game, just depending on how you click around. For instance, if you're trying to move something in your inventory, but you slightly drag it, it can just drop it, which is super annoying. So personally, I'll leave this on. If you're dropping a high value item, you want to be able to type in your bank pin in order to drop it. Then require a pin every login. I don't know what this is if you don't click it, meaning I don't know how often it asks you to type it in. My guess is that it's like once a day at a reset, but I would just leave this on for safety. Again, it's up to you. If you don't feel like you need a bank pin, then don't bother with any of this. I use a bank pin, so if you're going to use one, I say turn on all 3 of these. For this item value confirmation, I'll leave this alone. Once you get more familiar, you can adjust this as you see fit, but for now, you can just leave it alone. For inventory, this is all preference. So drag and drop means if you drag this out of your inventory and onto just the ground or anywhere else, it will drop it on the ground. So that's something that I use. Shift click. Similarly, if you hold down shift, you can click and then it'll just drop it on the ground. These are to taste. If you want these on, you're more than welcome to. If you don't want them on, don't turn them on. Dynamic backpack, this is set to 0 by default, and what this means is that as you adjust the size of your backpack, it will adjust how many rows and columns you have. The original RuneScape has 4 columns. I like the way that looks, so I just set it to 4 columns. This also means if you resize it, like you make it a lot bigger, obviously not that big, but if you make it bigger, you'll keep the 4 columns. So that's how I like it. This is all to taste, but I figured I would just describe everything that's going on here. Gain XP from lamp warning. I can't think of a great reason to turn this off. So I guess if you're using a bunch of lamps, you want to make sure you're using them on the right stat. I just turn it off. I don't think it matters. If you want to be like ultra paranoid and just make sure that you're always using the right lamps on the right thing, you can go ahead and leave this on. I think this is stupid. I just turn it off. As for the inventory management and destroy empty containers, on a main account, there isn't a great reason to turn any of these off. I would just make sure that these are all checked. I've been thinking about it for a little while, and I just can't think of a great reason to turn these off unless you want to collect them, I guess. But personally, I just make sure everything below here is checked, and then we'll leave it alone. Buff bar, you're going to ignore this until you're significantly more familiar with the combat. I will leave all this alone. And then game clock, I would tick all of these. Mini games are pretty important, and there are a lot of mini games that can give you a pretty big boost in your XP. So having all of these ticked and then going into the mini game settings to actually set which ones is your favorite is very, very nice. Also, this show resets on game clock. If you hover this star, it tells you when the day resets, when the week resets, and when the month resets. RuneScape has dailies, weeklies, and monthlies, so if you just want to know on the top of your head when all of that is, you can just look here. That'll show you everything. For combat and action bar, we're just going to leave all of this alone. This is basically not for this video because combat is going to be something we talk about a little bit later. For the camera, it puts you on modern, which is pretty zoomed in. Like, it doesn't look horrible, obviously. It's a little bit zoomed in, but you know, you still get a pretty decent view of the game world. You see the camera sort of lags behind you, so it's not snapped onto your character. Personally, I like this camera function. Consequently, I recommend if you also like this camera function to use the Freedom camera. It can zoom out significantly more, and it still has like the lagging camera, which is really nice. As you get into higher level content, being able to move and not have a jarring camera is going to be very, very important. The classic camera is ultra zoomed in and also sticks onto your character. I hate this. The bigger zoom is really important, but I just super don't like how this camera works. Freedom Classic lets you zoom out even more than Freedom, which is kind of crazy, but it's still snapped onto you. So personally, my recommendation is if you like the old camera, then feel free to use Freedom Classic. Otherwise, I highly recommend Freedom. Sensitivity, this is all to taste. Do what you will with this. Skills and experience, all of this, once we're a little bit more familiar, will go in here. But generally, I wouldn't touch any of this as a brand new player. I can't think of a great reason to interact with this menu basically at all. For item drops, I believe all this is ticked on by default. I wouldn't touch any of this. No reason to touch any of this. Same thing, loot beams, wouldn't touch any of this. Clue scroll to item stack, wouldn't touch any of this. All of these default settings are pretty good. For chat and social, I like to have local timestamps on. This just shows you what your current time is. If for whatever reason you can't see your in-game clock, if you have one monitor, you're playing a full screen, for instance. So as you can see, it is around 2:30 a.m. here. Not good. I should be asleep, but that already didn't happen. For this hide public chat thing, no one really uses these anymore. So personally, I wouldn't bother with this. You can turn it off if you think it's annoying, but again, no one uses it. So I would leave it alone. Split private chat is pretty interesting. It basically takes your whole private chat and just puts it somewhere else. So I usually have mine here where my mouse is. If you want this to be separate, cool. If you don't, it's up to you. For friends, accept aid and rune metrics, I would leave all this alone. The only thing is, as you get into high-end bossing, people can invite you to groups, and when people invite you to groups, a big pop-up shows up in the middle of your screen that has like a really big quick box. If you don't want randoms to be able to invite you, just set this to friends and clan. Besides that, I'll leave the rest of it alone. Finally, we're at notifications. I'll just leave all this alone. I won't touch any of this. For additional options, we talked about legacy combat. For the legacy interface skin, it turns everything brown. I think this is ugly, but it's up to you. Legacy map icons, I don't like these, but again, it's up to you. Legacy interface uses the 2011 interface. It won't let me do it because I'm in the introduction, but if you remember what 2011 looked like for older players, this will make it that exact same interface. And then a legacy combat removes all of the abilities and makes this similar to old school. Retro skill capes, this is all cosmetic. You can do whatever you want with that once you start getting your skill capes, if you start getting your skill capes. Now for accessibility options. High contrast mode. If you are colorblind or have any color deficiencies, you can turn this on. Entity highlight, what this does is any interactable, it will highlight in a color corresponding to what type of entity it is. So anything that you can click on and will give you either an interaction or an examine text will be blue. Any friendly NPC will have this yellow highlight, and anything that you can fight will have this red highlight. Now, I have it to always on if just for this. I believe the default is mouse over. You can do whatever you want with this. I'm trying always on for this series just so that it's easy to see what's going on. You can also set the border. This is obviously obnoxious, but if you just want to see all the clickable things, you can make that as big or as small as you want. The default is 4. I leave it at 4. There are also two different types of highlights. There's a border and silhouette. As you can see, border puts a border around the object, and silhouette highlights them. Typically, I don't recommend silhouette unless, again, you do have a color deficiency. There are enemies that when certain things are happening, they will change color, and the silhouette highlighting can make it very difficult to see when that's happening. So I would leave it a border, but it's up to you. The default for this is mouse over. Again, you can do whatever you want with this. Proximity is relatively close to you. So you can see as I'm getting closer to certain things, the border fades in, and as I move away, it's going to fade out. But yeah, that's what you're going to do here. I'm leaving it always on for the sake of this series. If for whatever reason that ends up not working, then I will let you know in the relevant episode. But this is all of the settings that you need to know for RuneScape. Now, the only other thing we're going to talk about today is your interface. You can see here the interface is fully customizable. You can drag basically everything around and set it to where you want to set it. What I would recommend is expanding your minimap. I'm just going to expand it to the same size as this bottom bar. So I'm going to make it like this big. That seems really big, but it's totally justified. Also, you want your worn equipment and your backpack to be visible at all times. So we're just going to put these up here and have them separate. You want your skill to be visible at all times, not because you're necessarily going to be in your skill book the whole time, but one of the things that's really nice about the skill book is that there is an in-game guide for all the skills. So if you click on the skill, it'll show you everything. So there's milestones. Standard just tells you all of like the normal equipment that you unlock at each level. Special tells you all of the not standard equipment. There's a miscellaneous, which is just like a random stuff that doesn't fit cleanly into the other categories. And that is for every skill. So if you want to see what you have to look forward to and what you're going to be unlocking, you probably want regular access to your skill menu. So I would say to have this by itself. And then as for your spellbook and prayers, you generally don't need access to all of these at the same time. You're usually either only looking at your prayer book or only looking at your spellbook. So I have these together. If you don't want them together, you're more welcome to separate it, but this is what I'm using. So I'm going to edit the sizings a little bit and then we will be right back. Okay, we're back. So I edited some of the sizings. I also popped out my friends list. Having your friends list in the chat is kind of annoying. So personally, I would recommend just pulling it out, especially if you are going to be relatively social on here. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the interface stuff. Once you have an interface that you're happy with, this is the interface that I've settled on. You're going to press the L key and that will lock the whole thing. And then I usually have my borders off, so I'm going to turn those off. And this is the interface that we're going to be working with. Moving forward, whenever I'm on this account, this is going to be what you guys are looking at. This is going to be what I'm looking at. If you are new, I will recommend setting up your interface like this. And we will talk about combat in the next episode because basically the first thing you do in the tutorial is combat. So yeah, that's going to be it. Thanks guys for watching and I will see you soon.